Hi folks, it's Rob Flux here from Property Developer Network coming to you for another one of our Sunday sessions. This week we've got something special for you. We've actually got a panel of experts in the AirBNB space and the session is called the AirBNB Bounce Back. We know that we've had a couple of challenges in and around the Airbnb space, but we thought we'd get we've got, I think, 6 different experts from around the country, one from pretty much every single state, to talk to you about everything that is happening in and around this space. So with that said, let me try and go through the arsenal of people we've got. So we've got Meredith from Victoria. She's from Custom B&B Hosting. We've got Ryan from Queensland. He's from B&B Edge. We've got Steph and Patrick from New South Wales. They're from Discovery B&B. We've got Wendy also from New South Wales and ACT. She's from B&B in Style. Sorry, this is a bit of a tongue twister. We've got Cherie from South Australia for B&B Hosts. And last but not least, we've got Rachel from WA from Space B&B. Did I get everyone there? I'm hoping so. Awesome. Welcome, everybody. Thank you. Feel free to unmute yourselves and contribute at any point at this point in time.
Thank you for having me.
Where I thought this would be very interesting is we are predominantly a property development group, but a lot of the things that we need to be cognizant of is cash flow inside our deals and different ways to actually look for that. And Airbnb is one of many different cash flow strategies that has been quite popular around the grounds. But I guess Airbnb in the last little while has had a little bit of a bumpy ride. So we thought we'd get to the bottom of where the bumps have been, what's caused them, and whether or not Airbnb is actually back. So with that in mind, who wants to tell us a little bit about some of the impacts that have hit your industry in the last 6 months in around bushfires and floods and pandemics and the like? And maybe if I nominate someone like Ryan, and then we'll just do a little bit of a bounce around the grounds.
Yeah, no worries, Rob. I'll take that one. Well, it was a bumpy road. So leading up to the coronavirus, like you said, that we had bushfires and floods to deal with. But I mean, mostly the occupancy rate didn't drop off too much. People still had to travel. You know, there's always holiday goers and business people and the likes always traveling. But coronavirus was it was a big shift for most of us that are in these sort of networks. And what we had to do is we just had to work to a solution where we could still fill up our rooms. So it wasn't all so much doom and gloom rather than just try to adapt to the situation. And like you've said previously, a lot of people did just close up shop because they got into a bit of a panic stage. And whereas a fair few of us moved into midterm bookings and we actually pivoted the business to secure all our rooms and have business people and also people that were like families of patients in hospitals. For me in particular, around Brisbane, we filled up a few of our Airbnbs for 3 months. We locked them in and really, we still had 100% occupancy for most of it. Obviously, the profits and the cash flow was down a bit, but yeah, we got through pretty much unscathed like that, and we're just seeing it really bounce back now.
Yeah, excellent in knowing that you can actually pivot your business the way you did, the way that you have. And also, I know that different parts of the country have actually been impacted very differently. So in talking to Rachel a little bit earlier, she was saying that in WA, they weren't impacted so much over there. So Rachel, why don't you comment as to how or why you guys weren't impacted?
Well, I guess initially we did have those moments where we saw most of our bookings cancel. And then, like Ryan said, it was all about pivoting the business and adapting to what was happening. And so we actually saw an opening in the market with FIFO workers. So if they wanted to work in WA, they couldn't actually leave the state. So we reached out to those people, and some of them reached out to us as well. So we actually got quite a lot of business from Turnover WA FIFO. So that was great. We were able to maintain high occupancy. Obviously, our rates were a little bit lower, but it still meant that we sustained what we needed to sustain and cash flow. so that we could keep going. And that really helped.
And I think that's testament to the fact that you guys are doing this being run as a business, as opposed to some people at home who are doing this in very much in a part-time capacity. So correct me if I'm wrong, but pretty much all of you are manage other people's properties as well as your own. And that is, I guess, a fundamental part of your business. What we have seen in the property market is a number of less than profitable Airbnb properties come onto the rental market, which has then caused, I guess, rents in the normal rental market to drop down. How have you seen that across yourselves and your clients across the board?
I can talk to that. I guess, like, I give the Docklands, I think, in Melbourne is a massive example, like massive exodus of the Airbnbs in that area, and certainly I've had real estate agents calling me from the Northcote area, north suburbs of Melbourne, who are saying, have you got any, do you have any owners who are wanting to take their properties back into the long-term market? I guess that just provides opportunity for us in a way, because there's got less competition for us now. And, as Rachel was talking about, we've been evolving and shifting the business to be able to find new markets and meet need, but also be able to stick around so that we're ready to accept new travellers as soon as, the borders opened and restrictions lifted. And that certainly happened as soon as, like, I'm in Victoria, and as soon as the restrictions lifted, bang, we were full again. And of course, as soon as some of the restrictions have come back, we've had bang, some exiting again. And we're just going, but we've got a system set up, and we're just back straight into, all right, finding our 3 monthers, our couple of week people. And yes, it's not as profitable, but certainly we've got systems and mechanisms in place that allows us to sort of flip between the two systems, get out of the online booking agencies like Booking.com and Airbnb, and using our own other networks to fill up our properties.
Yeah, and Meredith, yourselves in Victoria, obviously impacted, I guess, by the second wave quite a bit more than everybody else. But I guess other than yourself, is everyone else kind of starting to see clear air again? Haven't heard from Patrick and Steph yet, but are you guys starting to see clear air again?
Yeah, we've just set up 2 properties the weekend to go back onto Airbnb that just came off medium-term rentals, and yeah, we've got bookings coming straight in, back-to-backs. Bit of normality. It was a bit weird when I started. There's light at the end of the tunnel, and looks like people want to travel. And we've got a couple down the coast there that people are really wanting to escape from the city down to the outer suburbs and coastal towns. So I think there's a lot of regions that are doing well out of this as well that wouldn't normally do as well. So,
yeah, well, you've touched on a very good point there, Patrick, and that is that I anticipate that there is very different demand in very different areas. So when you're in a city versus when you're in the rural area versus when you're in the I guess the tourist type areas. So where are we seeing, I guess, most people wanting to go at the moment, or a lot of popularity? Wendy, I don't think we've heard from you yet.
Yeah, I can sort of talk to that. I mean, I've got property in Coffs Harbour, and obviously during COVID, that was an area that wasn't in a situation where you could fill up with your, travellers coming back, places like that. So we did close down. We had, obviously there were fairly hefty fines if you took any traveller that wasn't there for an appropriate purpose. But what we've found now, and I suppose in New South Wales, we're pretty lucky. We've hit the school holidays. So again, we're getting the influx of travelling, but we've also got the secondary aspect of the school holidays and people just wanting to get out and about. Most certainly, I think the regional areas are areas that have been fairly heavily sought, because people aren't necessarily wanting to go to the bigger environments, the bigger cities.
Well, they've been trapped in those bigger cities for quite some time, and they're wanting to get out.
That's
although,
it.
I mean, there's opportunities to go from one big city to the other big city. So I guess there's plenty of that happening around the grounds, I'm sure.
Yes, yeah. And I think that, you know, as you say, a bit of open space is seeming to draw people. And as I say, the smaller sort of, you know, cities, most certainly, I know that I'm booked back to back now for the next few weeks. But what we are noticing are the bookings are coming in more last minute. There's not that well ahead of time. And I suppose that's partly because people are still a little bit concerned, particularly over the last few weeks. You know, would there be a second wave? Would that mean that we'd have to pull our travel plans? So they're sort of making those decisions probably in their mind, you know, that they're organising their travel plans, but not actually booking until the, you know, closer to the time. And I've noticed in my own bookings, instead of, because mine was primarily heavily sort of a one-night transition between Sydney and Brisbane, that flow through, because Brisbane's had its borders closed, you know, has now transitioned into longer stays. So most certainly the bookings that are coming through now are for 3-4, you know, day stays, as opposed to an overnight travel trip and stopover.
Yeah, so predominantly in the past, were those short-term rentals, I guess, the most popular, or the most sought by yourselves because of the fact that they're more profitable? I'm anticipating there's a balance between profitability and, I guess, availability. So what's the sweet spot in a normal world, and then what's the current sweet spot?
For me, that was the one-nighters were surprisingly the majority. And funnily enough, I don't know why, but Tuesdays were a very popular day. I would have expected it, you know, more towards the weekends. But there is a awkwardness around a one-night stay. It's you know, a 3-bedroom turnover is a big turnover for one-night stay. You know, so there's the cleaning fee doesn't necessarily change whether it's 2, 3, 4 night. It's probably a little bit dirtier, so you might be up for, you know, further expenses in your cleaning aspects when you're doing the longer stay. But we were a situation where we had a lot of Asian travellers as well, which love to cook in our kitchens. So, you know, that was always a dilemma for our cleaner, you know, but it was obviously meeting the need because definitely the Asian travellers like to go with a number of generations. So they've got the children, they've got the parents, and they've got the grandkids. So the larger properties were, you know, more ideal for them. That's obviously an area that we're not getting that travel, you know, external travellers, but there seems to be a lot of internal travelling, you know, sort of taking the place of that. So it hasn't sort of, you know, disrupted the income, albeit we've kept our prices pretty much the same. We haven't had to reduce our prices.
Well, I mean, that's always good to hear, I guess, keeping price points up, but then just transitioning to slightly longer stays to, I guess, keep the cash turning over. That's really what it's all about. And I guess we're talking in a property development forum here. I guess the attractiveness for some of our property developers, knowing that we're actually coming into, I guess, a recession period, and a lot of our projects are either midway through or potentially, you know, we might have finished stock that we may not be able to sell at this moment in time. Is Airbnb a good opportunity to I guess, hold some properties waiting for that the uplift on the market on the other side?
I certainly think potentially. Sorry, Ryan. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think certainly potentially, if they're in the right area though, Rob, you've got to have them, you know, it's not going to be perfect for every property. Certainly while they're waiting to hold though, while they're holding the property, they could put them into Airbnb if they're in good locations like holiday destinations, event destinations.
CBD areas.
There, you know, if you're staging your property to sell it, you know, I know there's a bunch of developers over in WA who are putting their properties on Airbnb while they're being staged and while they're waiting to sell them, just to trying to recoup some of their money. They're trialing that out, I believe, with some success. But yeah, and then I guess you get the appraisal of an Airbnb, and that might be a higher rental return for some properties than the long-term lease. And I think that's, that can be quite attractive to future investors and buyers of your properties.
I just add to that. You've also got the ability, when it goes back onto the market, to sell it as an ongoing business for another Airbnb if someone wants to do that. So you're opening up a completely different market to buyers as well. And you can sell the furniture, you can sell it staged if you want to, because everything's already there. So there's a couple of added bonuses when you go to sell that you can do instead of just staging and trying to sell.
Yeah, one of the benefits that I saw was when we pick up a site that has to go through our development approval, we don't know if that's going to take 2 or 3 months or 6 or 7 months. And if you lock a tenant in for a 6-month period, you might be twiddling your thumbs for 2 or 3 months, or you get to that 6-month mark and then you've got this dilemma: do I extend the lease? Do I not extend the lease? Whereas Airbnb gives that flexibility of saying, well, we can keep renting it till the very last moment, and then when we're ready to do whatever work we need to do, we don't have the hassle of actually evicting someone. So I see that as a massive benefit.
I think also the try before you buy scenario is something that probably hasn't been tapped into, but your potential purchaser might like to stay in the property as an Airbnb, try it out, get a feel for the property, and you can get them over the line that way.
I hadn't thought about that one, Wendy. That's very creative of you.
In my developer portfolio, yep.
Rob, I guess in terms of though the quality of the property that you're going to have that you're about to demolish because you want to put more, might not be your Airbnb standard. You don't know. You could try it out, but I guess you just got to be aware of that it might not be a high quality property, but
there's a mix of properties. We don't demolish everything, Meredith.
I don't know you lot.
Yeah. So there's properties that are worth saving. They've got too much intrinsic value, and there's sometimes you're just doing work in the backyard to do a subdivision, for example, and the existing property needs to stay in place, and you might need to dig up the backyard for a week or so, and that impacts the tenant, but on an Airbnb listing, not so much. So I see lots of flexibility, but I take your point about it's got to be the right product for the right area. Absolutely. Yeah. So what dictates the right product for the right area?
Sherry, do you want to have a chat?
Okay. Thanks. So it is a lot of research to make sure that you do have a profitable Airbnb in the right area. So, all these people here can help with that, as in choosing the right area. It is crucial to the success of your Airbnb. So there is some things that we do need to take into account when you're looking at certain areas, and it would be like the transport around the area and the location and why are people coming to that area. So is it close to CBD, or is it a seaside location, or just different things that we find are quite particular when we're looking for Airbnbs ourselves. And if we were looking at doing a development, there'll be some things that you would want to make sure that you're doing a development if you're going to put it on Airbnb in the right areas. So that's where we can help out.
What about people who aren't developers and just thinking that they've got existing investment properties that are either underperforming or, Australia has been taught negative gearing, and now a lot of people are actually in financial distress right now with negative geared properties. How can Airbnb turn that around for people?
Sure. It can have a higher rental yield if it is the right property in the right area. So you would be encouraged to not go alone, because sometimes some properties are actually better to do a long-term rental than a short-term rental. So you do need the experts of like one of us to actually sort of give you a bit of a report and look to see if that property is worth putting it on short-term rental. I mean, there's a lot of factors as well. You know, if the investment property is already in an apartment building, you know, there's consequences there that they'll need to look at to see if it is allowable for short-term rental. And it is, there's a lot to consider before you just go and put your property on Airbnb. You do need to get expert help to make sure it is profitable for you.
And of course, we have a panel of experts here. So anyone in any jurisdiction, follow the links that we've got on our page to try and talk to the people in your area. Sorry, Meredith, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but yes.
I was just going to say, look, I think, you know, we know of another person that we're familiar with, or, you know, acquainted with, who has a bunch of developers who've got 50 properties in the Adelaide area, was in a distressed position, found Airbnb and has really been able to recover, and is no longer in a distressed position because she was able to access and utilize Airbnb, and is a huge advocate because of that. And I guess the things, you know, that she's talked to me about is, if I was going to do it again as a developer, I put some things in place when I'm doing my development to even keep it as a consideration. It's like, where can you put lock boxes? You know,
absolutely.
Where can you put store linen? So just some things to create and improve the efficiency. So for all you developers out there who are thinking about it and going, oh yeah, it might be something to consider, if you have a consult with one of us, we can just tell you, look, when you're doing your design, maybe just factor in there's enough room in the linen cupboard to put, you know, a bunch of cleaning products and a lock on the door, and you can, you know, where can you put your padlocks, or put your letter boxes outside if you can, and just some things that can really assist making an Airbnb decision more efficient. But they're not essential, but they're some helpful things.
Even access routes into the apartment itself. Too narrow an entrance, not only for a long-term tenant, but a short-term tenant. You know, it's problems getting their furniture in, it's problems getting suitcases in. So, you know, having just a slightly wider entrance so that you're not trying to squeeze. I've just gone through this weekend, so I can talk to that one. You know, it's just the basics of those sort of things, having, you know, more sturdy fittings so that, you know, they're not going to fall off the wall as soon as they're, you know, used multiple times.
But I think it's another good point, Wendy, about access, and I think there's a huge opportunity for accessibility for people with disabilities. And
yes.
I think and some other developers I've been talking to, you know, they would love to be building for people with disabilities. There's a you know, because they can access the NDIS money. There's people who want to travel, and it's just I think there's a really nice opportunity for a synergy between the Airbnb space, people with disabilities, and developers to build and, you know, meet a need, and where there's certainly some money.
And going back to Sorry,
I was going to say that it's a niche market, the disabilities, because if you think when you go and rent a property and put it on the sublease model, at that point you're bound by how the properties already is. So when Airbnb asks you, is it disability friendly, this, that and the other, you can't tick those. Whereas if you've got a disability, that's going to be the first thing you're going to be ticking, isn't it? So you're just opening up a new amount of people that you can be booking with.
Yep. Yeah. And sorry, Rob, I was just going to say, back on top of the part where you were talking about just considering it as an option, when you said that, you know, a lot of people were negatively geared and they were, you know, starting to look at the more positively geared side of things, I was on the same sort of boat with a property I had up north, and I had it positively geared, you know, getting a couple of grand a year or whatever, and I thought it was great until I saw the opportunity in Airbnb and the cash flow. I think when some owners or property developers realise the amount of cash flow that is possible, if it's the right property, it's definitely worth you know, a consult or a look into it, because it's if you work out, you know, nightly rates on properties and look at the occupancy that are in trends, you work it out pretty quickly that there's a lot of money in it.
Yeah, and I'd anticipate for solo operators that, you know, if they're not geographically close to their properties, that sort of thing, doing that remotely will be challenging, and hence the services of the likes of yourselves. to actually try and manage those properties. But what would be the pros and cons of why you'd want to take it on yourself versus why you would want to engage, I guess, a managed service?
Going with a managed service is just going to give a lot of people that are already busy in their lives, property developing or continuing on in their jobs. It's just they're not going to have to go through that initial year or two that it takes to get to that professional level of service where you can be comfortable with everything that you're doing. I think everyone on here can say that for 12 months or so, you know, it's like learning a new trade. It's you've got to deal with so many different challenges, but rewarding, and we all love it. But it is something that you can't just learn overnight. If you want to do it professionally with a few properties and ensure that you're going to get the most out of your property, then you want to make sure that you're doing it at a certain level, because you're leaving a lot of money. You're leaving a lot of money on the table, so to speak, if you're just doing it, if you're just kind of dabbling in it.
I'd guess that you're also getting economies of scale by using someone like yourself who has cleaners that are all in the same area, and you've got laundry services all in the same area and those sorts of things. I'm sure that you get economies of scale that an individual may not as well.
Yeah, sorry.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. I was just going to add to that. We can also use different tools to maximize profits. So whether it's software tools, whatever it is, we have them and we can use them, and that comes back to economies of scale, because a single operator won't use these because they're too expensive, but we can, and it basically we can maximize pricing. For example, we have a tool where automatic pricing comes into play, and there's an algorithm that does it for us. There's a whole lot of stuff that we can do that the average person with one or two properties doesn't have access to. So that's another as well.
Yeah, like going from that, Rachel, like as well as using a property management system software that costs, you know, a couple of $100 a month, and that's just one of the softwares that we all use. And, you know, getting your property across multiple platforms, everyone says, you know, Airbnb, but most of us all use, you know, booking.com, Airbnb, stays, home away. You get so much more variety of guests to choose from. And if you've got one property or two and you're just starting out, you're not necessarily going to go out and spend $500 a month on software that we've already got in place. So yeah, definitely.
I think the main thing about property management is all those dynamic pricing tools, but it's just about not having to stress about your property. Like you're vetting your guests, and you know what guest's going to come in and, you know, not take care of your property, and you didn't check them properly and that sort of stuff. Like, God, we've been vetting so many guests now, and we've got systems in place and knowing what to check, and you know, making sure you've learned how to get their security deposit, so when they steal your keys, you're ready to go. So we've dealt with all that crap, and we can do it.
I think all that stuff is what you meant to say, Meredith, I'm sure.
I mean, I suppose we're also pretty good at guest communication. So, you know, we're liaising with the guests before, you know, as soon as they sometimes there's questions before they want to book and formalise a booking. And then you're following up with a nice sort of welcome. Thank you for booking. We're keen on hosting you. So there's all these little techniques that we've learned that makes the guest, even before they've set foot in our place, you know, feel welcome, anticipate, you know, a really good time in our properties. And, you know, that sort of then translates to the communication that we do when they arrive. You know, the evening of, we're sending a nice welcome note as well. Any issues, please contact us. So we've built those systems in play to make the guest experience the best it can possibly be. You know, we're quick with communication. When you're having to deal with numerous other activities and possibly, you know, full-time job on the side, you know, you just don't have the time to tweak and do those sort of things to the optimal level. And obviously the aim of us doing all of this is to get a really good guest review at the end, because that actually improves our standing in each of these booking platforms as well. And it attracts, you know, better quality guests to our properties. So it, you know, it has this cyclical effect of improving everything, you know, around the whole system. Yeah,
absolutely.
Just on Meredith with about the guests. So just, you know, we're experts on screening guests. You know, if you have your own 1 or 2 properties yourselves, you won't know what to look for. So there's a lot of signs. We deal with that every day. So we've got multiple properties. We see these guests, you know, as much as most of our guests are beautiful guests, there is some that want to do the wrong thing in the properties, and we know things to look out for. We deal with that. We have a lot of experience in that as well. So we do take the emotion out of just getting that booking, especially if you're a bit desperate. It's like there's a procedure that we all follow, and there's steps in place that we go, okay, yep, we know that this one's not sure about this one. We know what questions to ask to make sure that we do get a good guest into the property. You know, so where if you're just an owner wanting to go and get a guest, you may not know what to look for as well. So it's very important, and that's a big part when you say, guys, that just screening guests, making sure we do get the correct ones into the properties.
Yeah, but we want to make sure the person's property is taken care of. Like we don't.
Right.
It's too much pain.
So we've touched on where the property is. We've touched on, I guess, the type of property and the quality of the property and access to the property and those sorts of things. But if we get a tick in all of those boxes, I'm anticipating that there's a few other challenges around legislation in each different jurisdiction and what is and isn't required. And I anticipate that's different from state to state and also different from council to council. So what are some of the little idiosyncrasies that you might not be aware of that happen in some of these bizarre jurisdictions? Who's got some doozies for people to be aware of?
Yeah, everyone's kind of had different experiences, and the big one is body corporates going into a building that you think's perfect. A big tip is just not to avoid them. I know that a lot of people that aren't doing it professionally or are just doing it, as you said, as a side hustle or something on the side of their job, they're just trying to sneak away with it, and it's not the right way to go, because once the body corporate find out, then you know they can create drama for you. In Queensland, in particular, I've had a property that was in high density residential, and that wasn't zoned correctly. And although there was nothing against having a short-term rental in there with the bylaws of the body corporate, eventually midway through it, I went through the owner. We were working direct with the owner. The owner was, you know, just absolutely loving us in there, because, you know, she never had a person that looked after a property like as much as we have. She had uni students in there before us that were creating all sorts of problems for her. So we were looking after it, and we were vetting all the guests, and then body corporate halfway through decided that they wanted to put a notice out and say that they didn't want to have short-term rentals in there, because there was I think there was about 3 or 4 in that complex. And those are the things, you know, you need to, because of the zoning in Brisbane, body corporate couldn't actually kick us out, but the council could. So they sort of went to council, and we got a notice, and this all took months and months of time while we were just operating, and everyone was still quite happy. But at the end of the day, it was nothing kicked us out, but our lease did finish. So we just decided that we weren't sure how it was going to go or what was going to happen, but we picked up another great apartment, so we just moved everything over to that. And it's just things to look out for. You need to talk to town planners or make sure that you know that you're doing the right thing, because if you're not doing the right thing from the start, then, you know, you're just opening yourself up to maybe having some problems, you know, down the track. So
I think, you know, you're right, like talking, and developers are absolutely aware of this, about talking to council, and that one side of the road can be something and the other side of the road can be completely something else. And that's the case in the Gold Coast. I know I'm Victoria, but, you know, talking to some Gold Coast people, you know, one area you can do it, other area you can't. But it's just about, again, asking the questions, doing the communication, and doing the research. But yeah, who else has got a doozy?
I think everybody's probably a bit worried about this 180 days that's coming in.
into New South Wales.
Into New South Wales.
So for those of us who are uninitiated, Patrick, tell us about this 180 days and what's it mean?
Well, kind of what people think and what it is are kind of two different things. So, if you don't read into it, you think that you can only get 50% of your property booked a year. But realistically, there's a lot of finer details in it, and what actually is a short term, classed as short term, which is only like 1 day to 20 days. Anything over 21 days or above is like in the executive leasing type of, but we'd call it like medium term. So that wouldn't go towards your 180 days. And then anything above 3 months would technically be a lease. So there is almost like people are scared of it, but it's actually nothing to be worried about. If anything, it's better because it might scare off the lower properties or the managers that are not doing quite well, but it'll just mean the professionals will do it better and take advantage of it.
Just because I didn't really pick up the intent of that, is that saying if you have more than 180 days, it's a problem, or less than 180 days, it's a problem?
Technically, you could only rent your property out for 180 days of the year. So 365 days of the year, technically you can only rent it out for 180 days of that 365. But it's not a place. But it's not.
Is that a specific suburb?
It's Greater Sydney.
Yeah.
But that's a Sydney only challenge. Is that what you're saying?
Byron Bay are looking at bringing in 90 days. It's now, if it comes into law, councils can implement it, but there's a few councils looking at it, but it's essentially Greater Sydney, but it's not in place yet. So it's been in the woodwork for about 2 years, but it's not in place. But just for the people that have looked up Airbnb, they'll probably have found that, and just to let them know that it's not actually really anything to worry about. If you talk to us, we can explain it more.
Okay. Well, I know that in Sydney there are 37 different councils, and so I'm anticipating that not every single one of them are going to take that little challenge up. Australia-wide, there's 537 different councils, so there's always idiosyncrasies of every description in every single council. So it's always make sure that you know what you're doing. But on top of that, then there's building code compliance. So what are the things that you need to be cognizant of with regards to fire management, for example, or the building classifications or anything like that that comes to mind?
So my understanding is that when it's still residential property and it's under those kind of codes, and there's nothing specific. When I've been talking to other developers in Victoria or any at the moment, there's nothing specific. If you're going to be doing your whole building as an Airbnb, then you're going to be looking at hotel kind of stuff. That's a different permits required, occupancy. If you're doing rooming houses, which I think you do, Rob, don't you? Like there's some different, not rooming houses, sorry. You're renting by room. So you've got multiple.
I do some rent per room, yes.
Correct. So, and that's some different requirements. But Airbnb doesn't cover those because we only lease to one person, even though we might have, we've got to have multiple rooms. We only ever sort of sign up one lease for one person. So yeah, from my understanding, talking to different developers around Victoria, nothing specific around Airbnb.
Okay, but if you were to try to do multiple rooms in the one property, then that would trigger, then I would anticipate.
That's right. If you're going to sold up multiple, separate, renting out separate rooms into one property, it becomes a house thing.
But
sorry.
I was going to say that'd become a little bit of a nightmare logistically, I would think anyway. So, yeah.
Yeah, most of us do full apartments, and we make them really profitable just by doing that. I don't know too many people myself that do just room by room, other than maybe trying to organise something throughout this last couple of months. But I just wanted to say, on top of the all my chats with the council that I've had, I know that council town planners in Brisbane, sometimes they might say one thing and then and someone will go and just do another thing anyway because they've had a private firm working for them and they'll do an impact accessible application. The council that I've spoke to, I've said, oh, this is Kangaroo Point, and they've said, yeah, it's kind of it's a hard one for us because we're trying to play a bit of catch up, and the Kangaroo Point's so close to the city, and I said, yeah, well, there's over 100 private Airbnbs there, and you're sort of saying that that it's not zoned correctly for that, but it's just if people want to create an issue with it. So he was sort of saying if you put a application in to get that through, there's a high chance that it'll go through. And then I had a look on the website, and it's it says things like Brisbane City Council values the complementary role that a range of temporary accommodation options can play in the support of tourism, business conventions, and major events in Brisbane. And there's no public notification requirements for the application. It just rather goes primarily the city plan 2014, and it to primarily ensure that adjoining residents or businesses are not significantly impacted by the use. So I think it's a bit about being smart before you get started, and talking to an expert that can help you out.
Yep, absolutely. I might, and I've been whizzing through to see what some of the comments are coming through. So I've tried to touch on the comments coming through, but now I'll try and pick out some specific questions. So we've got Rachel here, who's been, looks like she's been managing her own Airbnbs by herself, and says that, she's had nothing since March, and she's normally booked back to back. So are you seeing similar things in it? So I know Rachel's in, Southeast Queensland range. So depends on which property she's looking after, but I think Brisbane. But are there particular issues at the moment with right now in Brisbane not getting that sort of demand, or is it potentially one of those things where self-managed is might be better as a professional management?
Yeah, being in Brisbane, I was saying earlier that I can understand that she might have those issues because of there's things like being on one platform, just being on Airbnb, that immediately is going to take away another 20-30% occupancy that you might otherwise get via booking.com and HomeAway and things like that. And as well as just realizing that situation that we're in, like I do this full time with my wife as a business, and we had no other option but to kind of adapt to the situation. So we found, with the help of a lot of these guys as well, we found a lot of niche platforms that were catering to executive style bookings, all sorts of stuff like that, and kind of got everything together within a 2-week period. And then it's just been back to, I've had actually more occupancy the last couple of months than I've ever had before, because we've had those longer term people come through. So yeah, just really working to get that together for a couple of weeks. And now it's actually been really great for us, because myself and my wife, we're a lot more confident in the business now that our worst case scenario has eventuated, and we were able to get on top of it and keep going forward. And now it's kind of gone back to normal for us the last couple of weeks.
Now, one person did do a tongue-in-cheek response to Rachel, which was to say, take in quarantine people because you're guaranteed to have them for a fortnight. Is that something that's even possible or allowed? I know that people are going to hotels, but have any of you come across that at all? Or
yes, I've actually had quite a few self-quarantine people. So we ask the questions beforehand. And we make sure that we, after they book out, check out, we actually make sure we have the property vacant for a couple of days, and let the cleaners be aware also that we have had a person in self-isolating. So we actually encouraged it, because there was a lot of people, before it was mandatory, we actually had a lot of people that were needing to self-quarantine. They didn't want to go home, or they didn't want to be where there was other people. So yeah, we actually encouraged it quite a lot. We actually put it in some of our advertisements as well, and sort of said, look, we'll
it's had to take it out, mind you. We're not allowed to offer it to quarantine anymore.
No, not now. That's right. But earlier days when it first happened. So yeah, so we did have quite a few people through.
Yeah.
Rob, sorry, could I interrupt for a moment? Just wanting to go back to the New South Wales situation and the government regulations, just to clarify.
Sure.
That's a New South Wales government edict. So the regulation is, already, it's not down to each council, that 180, but the Greater Sydney area, that's already a 180-day scenario. The other councils in the rest of New South Wales can choose what they want to do. As Patrick said, Byron are already having a conversation around it. Coffs Harbour is having a conversation around it. They can dictate themselves as to whether they want to put a limitation or restriction on the days, or they don't have to. And most of the areas that are looking at the potential to restrict the days are more or less saying that there's not enough permanent rentals in the area. So obviously people have realised that they're getting a better return on investment with the short term, so they've transcribed their sort of properties over to the short term rental. And that's obviously put more pressure on the permanent rental availability in those areas. That's where that discussion's sort of rising up from.
Yeah, thank you.
Most certainly the councils within the Greater Sydney, they're not going to have a choice. That's going to be a set day period across the board.
So dictated by state government, who overrules local government. Okay.
Yep.
Good to know. And quite an interesting approach in that case for state government to actually be impacting upon people's businesses and livelihoods. I would anticipate that's a little bit controversial within that segment of the market and the industry. So what's been the pushback, Wendy?
Well, I mean, there's been many, as Patrick said, it's been ongoing for 3 years. My understanding is in March, just after the COVID sort of closed down, I think they slipped that through, and I think you'll find that's actually approved now and in operation, is what the information that I've read.
Okay, so if you're in, I guess, Greater Regional Sydney, then certainly be aware of that and go looking for that. So, which brings me to, I guess, next question. So, Lefty's got a question which says, if you know nothing about Airbnb at all, where would be the first place to start looking for, I guess, what makes a good property? What sort of legislation you need to worry about? Where's a good starting point to learn that?
Yeah, I'd say go talk to a local expert. Even if you're not going to go with them, they'll give you some information to help you along, or they might even consult. So there's consultants out there that will consult you and help you go on. Just like you contact the town planner, contact a professional and they'll give you information about it and help you, point you in the right direction.
Very good. And clearly there's 6 of you right here. So click in the links below, folks. That's what you're meant to do. Okay, so Jason says, never like negative gearing. The word negative doesn't sound right when wanting to invest. So statement, not a question, but I would wholeheartedly concur with that.
Absolutely.
Now, Rachel's got a question. Do you use Autobook? So I don't know what Autobook is, but if so, do you screen?
I'll talk to that one. The auto booking is a mechanism within, for example, the booking platforms, particularly Airbnb. Generally, what we as professionals have done have set up parameters as to when we would allow that immediate booking. I mean, the guests like the immediate booking because they get an immediate response. Yes, we've got that property, it's locked in. But we've set behind the background, in the background, certain parameters. So they would have had to have had, for example, ID notification. So usually, driver's license, some form of government regulated ID. Some people will choose to put they've already stayed in other properties and they've got positive reviews. That can be another one of the parameters that you set, that you won't take people who haven't already had positive reviews. So there are things that we do in the background as professionals that sort of screen the guest before they even get to the point of pressing the button to do the booking. If they meet those parameters and they're ready to go forward with the booking, when they book, they get an automatic response that, you know, your holiday's locked in.
Yeah.
Other people choose, and particularly over this COVID period, I think most of us have chosen to take that off our systems. And because we've wanted to ask other questions, we wanted to find out, you know, where are you coming from? What's the reason why you're coming to our area? You know, just responsible, you know, COVID questions. So we've sort of tended to set aside the instant booking at this point, but, you know, probably, you know, reconsidering bringing that, you know, back on, you know, sort of from this point on. Yeah, but that's...
I haven't turned my instant book off. I've left it on the whole time. And the reason is, Rachel, your instant book increases and improves your algorithm, your Airbnb algorithm, and your other platforms as well. So you want to be at the top of your listing, top of the pages in Airbnb and booking.com, whatever else you're using. And one of the ways is by having your instant book turned on. It could be controversial, and yet we've had to scramble one time to go and get the keys out of the lockbox because it was a dodgy person, but you can do that.
Yep. So David's got a question. How does council measure and enforce the number of data limitations? So I'm assuming that's the question about 180 days. So how do they measure that and enforce that?
Yeah, I think it'll be very difficult. Especially for us, we're across like 200 platforms. So council will have to talk to all the platforms to get the information. So I think it is, unless they're going to make us have to give them the information, I think it's going to be very difficult to police. I would say, and there will be a lot of bugs in it in the first year or so, I would imagine.
And I think the only platform that I'm aware of at the moment that has agreed to provide information is actually Airbnb. I don't think any of the other platforms have formalised, you know, some, you know, ability to provide that information or allow that forwarding of information through.
Yeah, I know Booking.com have said no, they're not going to give that information. So
200 platforms, that's an insane number of platforms for everybody to be across. So I'm assuming that's across lots of different niches and the like. You know, is there a shortcut to, you know, where do you find this list of 200, or is that all up here?
Yeah, well, we have like the guys talked about a PMS, so everything is pulled back into one central location. So although we're 200 different places, we see it all in one place. So that helps us manage them. Like that. So yeah, it's like Ryan says, that investing the money in the software helps you to be able to get a lot of more places and a lot of more visibility, but actually with not much more effort because we're having that system in place.
Yeah, and if you can have one property, it might not be worth it for you to put it out on all that sort of stuff, but you know, you could add it to the portfolio that we manage and get access to it. That's just another thing that we can offer people in regards to professional management.
Yeah. Okay. So Sunil's got a question. How is the demand in Western Sydney areas? So that's a Wendy and a Patrick and Steph question.
Yeah, well, you'd be surprised. Obviously, Sydney has two central hubs. So you've got Parramatta and you've got Sydney, and soon to be a third with the new airport. But you have a lot of business people around the Parramatta area. You have a lot of people visiting families. And then you have a lot of families that want a family home outside the city. And if it's near a transport link, then they can get into the Sydney or where they want easy. So there's things that appeal to certain people that wouldn't to the other. So a young family might not want to be in the centre of Sydney, but might want to be able to get there easy. So they might want to stay in a house outside and then travel in. And so that's why transport links are crucial as well. So it can open up what you wouldn't normally think is an area where Airbnb were popular, but they can get to where they want and maybe be at a cheaper price point to make their stay in Sydney more affordable.
And I think also, sporting events, based in certain areas draw, a number of guests as well, particularly areas that have regular, for example, Coffs Harbour have quite a lot of international or, national sort of different sports coming to the area. So that sort of draws your guests. They're looking for accommodation. Same would be in the outer west, areas.
Absolutely. Now, Rachel has responded to Patrick saying, what are the 200 platforms? So, mate, if you've got 30 seconds, can you just rattle them all off? That'd be greatly appreciated.
I can rattle off some if you want, but I'll be a while. But any of the ones you think, like Trivago, What If, Agoda, Expedia, hotels, any of the ones. There's so many, and they all specify in different countries. So different countries have their, like you got WeChat, you got different countries that go on different sites. So they kind of attract the international traveler from that area because that's the sites they use, and then that gets them to book with us when they go overseas.
Yeah, so you've got one management platform that pushes it to multiple directions. That's really the gist of it.
Yeah, and there's also like big holding companies that own a lot of different small OTAs. So they push them out to them as well. So
yeah. So there's another question from Rachel directly at Ryan about costs, but I think we might take costs offline and just provide contact details. They can, because I'm sure there's different costs for different things. So
absolutely.
Rachel and everyone, all of the links, I've seen Shelley's already put all of the links to all of our guests here today, so you can got their phone numbers and websites, etc. in there. So
if Rachel wants to send me a message or a text or anything, we're happy to have a chat to her.
Perfect. Ashish has got a question. Oxenford in Gold Coast, if anyone has any views regarding demand near the theme parks.
I don't have much experience in that particular area. I know that Gold Coast and Brisbane individually can be they're both great spots, but Oxenford I gather is just slightly north where the theme parks are. So I would have to do like a property analysis or have a bit of a look at the area before I could give some correct data on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly not an expert in it, but I'd hypothesize that anyone that stayed at Oxenford would be for a single night, whereas if they stayed at either Gold Coast or Brisbane, that's going to be a hub where they jump off to all sorts of places and they'll come back to it every single night. That would just be my guess. So yes, you might get them, but maybe not. It'd be a little bit more turnover.
It really depends, Rob. You'd be surprised. There's been a lot of places that I've had a look at, and I've thought, if I was staying there, I would prefer to stay on the Gold Coast or Brisbane. But you have a look at the numbers, and sometimes a place that I think, it'll probably be no good there, it might average 60% occupancy. And if you've got a nice house that can sleep, a multi-generational family coming over from a lot of different places, they might just think it's the perfect spot, and you might get quite a really nice nightly rate and a 60% occupancy, and that's it could work really well. So it's just a matter of really having a look at the trends and the data and getting some real time numbers there. Yeah,
so there's a couple of people starting to ask questions about particular areas and the demand, rather than kind of go down the 5,000 suburbs that are in Australia. I might just say reach out to the relevant experts in the relevant areas, and I'm sure you guys can help massively in that regard. So,
absolutely,
folks, we're coming up to the hour mark. So I wanted to say thank you very much for all of your time in trying to help us out here. Very informative into our community, and I'm sure onwards to your own community who are following you as well. So with that in mind, I want to say a huge thank you to Meredith, who actually convened all of this together for us. So thank you, Meredith. So Meredith is from Victoria, from Custom BNB Hosting. We've got Ryan and Aniko also from Queensland for BNB Edge. We've got Steph from Discover BNB, Wendy from BNB in Style in New South Wales, Cherie from South Australia, BNB Hosts, and Rachel lastly from WA for Space B&B. So hopefully I got everybody again right that time round. I want to thank you all for your time, and if anyone's got any questions, pop them into the chat, and I'm sure you guys will try and help them out as much as they can.
Definitely.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks
Thanks,
so
Meredith.
much.
No worries. Thank you, folks. And we'll see you all next Sunday, and for our next Sunday session at 5 o'clock. Bye for now.